Hey guys, tonight we're traveling back to ancient Peru, where you're standing on a narrow mountain trail with lungs burning from the thin air, muscles trembling from exhaustion, and somehow expected to keep running for miles more. Your feet are calloused. Your lightweight tunic offers little protection against the biting Andean wind, and that message tube slung across your chest. It contains information so vital that empires rise or fall on whether you deliver it in time. You probably won't survive to retirement age in this career. Few messengers do, when your job description includes run across mountain ranges daily and never, ever fail the emperor. If this is helping your restless mind slow down, gently tap that like button and subscribe to our historical sleep journeys. I invite you to share your location and local time in the comments so we can know where our community of dreamers is joining us from. Now, prepare your environment. Reduce the brightness of your room. Rest your eyes momentarily while taking 3 deep breaths, and let's gently navigate together through this narrative that will lead us to rest. You are a chasqui, an elite messenger in the service of the Sapa Inca, the divine ruler of Tawantinsuyu, the 4 regions of the sun, better known to us today as the Incan Empire. In the 15th and early 16th centuries, this empire stretched from modern-day Colombia to Chile, encompassing over 770,000 square miles of some of the most challenging terrain on Earth. Without horses, without wheels, without a conventional writing system, the Inca nevertheless built one of history's most efficient communication networks, and you are its lifeblood. While European kingdoms of the same era might take weeks or even months to send messages across similar distances, the Inca relay system that you're part of can transmit information at astonishing speeds. According to Spanish chronicles, urgent messages could travel from Cusco to Quito, about 1,200 miles, in just 5 days. That's roughly 240 miles per day, a feat that left the conquistadors utterly astonished when they first encountered it. Your importance can't be overstated. The vast empire you serve is held together not by technological superiority, but by information. Fast, reliable information. In a realm where the terrain itself seems designed to keep people apart, with towering mountain ranges, scorching deserts, dense rainforests, and treacherous rivers, you and your fellow messengers create connection, making governance of such diverse lands possible. Historians still argue whether the chasqui system was created by the Inca or inherited from earlier Andean civilizations like the Wari, who ruled much of Peru centuries before the Inca rose to power. Some archaeological evidence suggests messenger stations existed along Andean highways long before the imperial expansion of the 15th century, but the Inca undoubtedly perfected the system to a degree unmatched in the pre-Columbian Americas. As a messenger, you occupy a paradoxical position in society. You're neither noble nor common. You exist in that curious middle ground reserved for specialists whose skills are irreplaceable. Some chasqui come from families that have served the communication network for generations, with fathers training sons in the art of swift mountain running from an early age. Others are selected for their exceptional endurance and loyalty, recruited from villages as a form of tax obligation. You aren't running messages constantly. That would kill even the hardiest human within weeks. Instead, you're stationed at one of the thousands of small relay posts that dot the imperial highways. When another messenger arrives, panting and sometimes barely conscious from exertion, you take the message and sprint to the next station while your colleague recovers. This system allows information to travel continuously, day and night, without being limited by a single messenger's endurance. Tonight, as you rest on your sleeping mat in a remote way station, you reflect on the immense responsibility now resting on your shoulders. Tomorrow, you'll carry news that could shape the destiny of millions. perhaps reports of rebellion in a distant province, or warnings of strange pale men with beards and thunder weapons landing on the Empire's northern shores. In a realm where information is power, you are power's swiftest conduit. Your journey to becoming a Chasqui began long before you carried your first official message. While other children in your village were learning to tend crops or herd llamas, you were already being assessed for the rare combination of physical attributes and mental sharpness required for Imperial messaging service. The elders watched you climb steep trails without tiring, noticed how you memorized complex instructions after hearing them just once, and observed your unwavering focus during endurance games that left other children exhausted and distracted. By age 7, your training began in earnest. Each morning before dawn, you ran barefoot along mountain paths with older boys, gradually increasing distance and difficulty. Your lungs burned as they adapted to functioning in the thin air at elevations sometimes exceeding 14,000 feet. You learned to regulate your breathing, to find the rhythm that would carry you for hours without collapse. This wasn't just about speed, though speed mattered enormously, but about sustainable endurance across the Empire's vertical landscape. One particularly quirky training technique involved running with water-filled gourds balanced on your head. Drop or spill the water, and you'd face additional hours of training as punishment. This practice taught you the smooth, efficient stride that distinguishes elite messengers, a running form that minimizes vertical bouncing and conserves precious energy over long distances. Modern marathon runners would recognize the biomechanical wisdom in this ancient training. You still remember the day your mentor took you to observe the Empire's main highway passing through a nearby valley. "This," he said, gesturing to the immaculately maintained stone path stretching beyond the horizon, "is the realm's true treasure." The Kapak Nyan, or Royal Road, represents an engineering achievement that historians still struggle to fully appreciate. Without metal tools, wheels, or draft animals, the Inca constructed a 24,000-mile road network connecting the Empire's most remote corners, complete with suspension bridges spanning chasms, stone steps carved into mountain faces, and causeways traversing marshlands. Water discipline became second nature during your training. Unlike lowland runners who might drink at will, you mastered the art of running for hours with minimal hydration, knowing that many mountain sections offered no water sources. On particularly brutal routes, you learned to extract moisture from certain cacti and to recognize the subtle signs of springs hidden among seemingly barren rock formations. Your training wasn't solely physical. For hours each day, you practiced memorization techniques with elders who would recite increasingly complex messages and expect perfect repetition. Unlike European civilizations with their written languages, the Inca Empire transmitted most verbal information through precise oral recitation. A single error in delivering the Sapa Inca's commands could result in punishment not just for you, but for entire communities misled by incorrect instructions. "The legs of a deer with the memory of a wise elder," your trainer would often say. "This is what makes a true Chasqui." You came to understand that mental fortitude mattered as much as physical endurance. When exhaustion clouds judgment and oxygen deprivation affects the brain, maintaining message integrity becomes your greatest challenge. By adolescence, your body transformed in response to the rigorous training regimen. Your heart grew physically larger, allowing it to pump more blood with each beat, an adaptation seen in elite endurance athletes across time and culture. Your lung capacity increased dramatically, and the density of mitochondria in your muscle cells multiplied, enhancing your ability to generate energy efficiently. Historians still argue about whether certain highland populations of the Andes developed genetic adaptations specific to high-altitude exertion, but the physiological changes from your training are undeniable. not everyone survived the training. You witnessed several promising candidates succumb to the extreme conditions, some from high-altitude pulmonary edema during particularly challenging mountain crossings, others from injuries sustained on treacherous trails that became deadly when help was days away. The mortality rate among messenger trainees remains a subject of scholarly debate, with estimates ranging from 5 to 20%, depending on the region and era. Your feet, once soft and vulnerable, developed thick calluses that serve as natural shoes. Though you own simple sandals made from llama hide for particularly rocky terrain, you often run barefoot, your soles now impervious to all but the sharpest stones. Your toes spread wider than those of non-runners, giving you superior balance on narrow mountain ledges where a single misstep means certain death. As your final test approached, the training intensified. For 3 days, you ran with minimal rest and food, carrying increasingly heavy message pouches across mixed terrain. Experienced messengers followed at a distance, ready to intervene if you collapsed, but offering no assistance otherwise. When you finally returned to your training center, legs trembling and vision blurred from exhaustion, the village elders nodded in solemn approval. You had proven yourself worthy of joining the Empire's most critical communication network, born to run the mountains and jungles that lesser mortals viewed as impassable barriers. You stand before the local priest official, your heart beating rapidly, not from exertion for once, but from nervous anticipation. This ceremony marks your transition from trainee to full chasqui, a moment you've worked toward for years. Around your neck, an elder places a distinctive patterned sash that immediately identifies you as an imperial messenger. This isn't merely a uniform, it's a sacred emblem of your connection to the divine authority of the Sapa Inca himself. The message you carry is the breath of the emperor, the priest intones, his voice carrying the weight of generations of tradition. His words flow through you as sunlight flows from our father Inti. To falter in your duty is to interrupt the divine order. This isn't empty ceremonial language. You genuinely believe it. In Inca cosmology, the emperor is a direct descendant of the sun god, and the messages you carry extend his divine will across the empire. Your role transcends mere postal service. You're a living conduit of sacred authority, delivering not just information, but the literal embodiment of imperial power to the furthest reaches of Tawantinsuyu. The spiritual dimension of your work manifests in small rituals you'll perform throughout your career. Before departing on important journeys, you make offerings of coca leaves at wayside shrines called apachetas, cairns built at mountain passes, where the boundary between the human and divine realms seems thinnest. These sacred piles of stones mark the points where the energy of the earth is believed to concentrate, providing spiritual assistance to weary travelers. Remember, your mentor whispers during the ceremony, when you run, you never run alone. He tells you of the protective spirits that accompany faithful messengers, mountain deities called apus, who guide your feet away from hidden dangers, and ancestral spirits, who lend strength when your mortal body begins to fail. Modern anthropologists note that this spiritual framework provided psychological resilience for messengers facing almost superhuman physical challenges. One of the more unusual aspects of your initiation involves a shaman examining the patterns in a handful of scattered coca leaves to predict your future success and potential challenges as a messenger. Based on this divination, you receive a small amulet carved from stone or shell that's believed to counteract your specific vulnerabilities. Some messengers carry condor feathers for speed, others wear pendants of black obsidian for protection against malevolent forces. After the formal ceremony comes a practical demonstration of your new authority. You're given a small object that looks unremarkable to outsiders, a wooden cylinder decorated with geometric patterns. but represents one of the most powerful symbols in the empire. The royal quipu, a knotted cord that functions as an imperial credential. When presented at any way station or provincial center, this object commands immediate compliance with your needs and requests. Food, shelter, fresh supplies, even armed escorts if necessary, all must be provided without question upon presentation of these symbols. The quipu cannot lie, the official explains, handling the knotted cord with reverence. Neither must you. Historians still argue about the exact significance of different messenger insignia, with some suggesting the patterns and colors on your sash might indicate specialization, perhaps denoting messengers who carried military information versus agricultural reports or census data. Others propose the designs simply identified which administrative region you served, allowing local officials to quickly recognize whether you came directly from Cusco or from provincial centers. The most sacred aspect of your calling becomes clear when the priest explains the concept of personal substitution that underlies the messaging system. When you speak the words entrusted to you, it is as if the original sender, be it the emperor himself or one of his high officials, is speaking directly to the recipient. This transforms you from mere courier into something closer to a living embodiment of authority, temporarily housing the imperial voice within your body. This spiritual framework serves a practical purpose too. Throughout the empire, tampering with or impeding a messenger is punishable by death. The divine protection surrounding your role means even powerful regional lords must treat you with respect and cannot detain you, regardless of whether they like the messages you deliver. You've heard tales of provincial governors executed for delaying chasqui, carrying urgent imperial communications, a reflection of how seriously the Inca took their information network. A particularly quirky tradition follows the formal ceremony. You must consume a special meal prepared by the most respected messenger in your... The meal contains specific ingredients believed to impart speed, endurance, and clarity of mind. Guinea pig meat for intelligence, a particular variety of native potato for stamina, and a carefully prepared coca leaf infusion for alertness. Modern nutritionists might smile at some of these associations, but the high protein, complex carbohydrate composition of this traditional meal actually represents an excellent diet for endurance athletes. As night falls, you sit with the other newly initiated messengers around a small fire. Veterans of the imperial roads share stories that range from inspiring to terrifying. Tales of messengers who completed seemingly impossible journeys through blizzards or floods, and others who disappeared without trace in remote mountain passes. You listen attentively, understanding that these aren't just entertaining anecdotes, but crucial survival information disguised as storytelling. By the time you lay down to sleep, you feel the weight of your new identity settling around you like a cloak. Tomorrow, you'll run your first official route as a full chasqui, joining an unbroken chain of messengers that stretches back through generations. More than a profession, you've entered a brotherhood with its own codes, beliefs, and shared understanding of what it means to serve as the vital communication system of the world's most vertical empire. You watch intently as the regional governor speaks, his lips forming each word with deliberate precision. This message must reach the provincial capital by tomorrow evening, an urgently needed request for additional grain supplies following unexpected crop damage from early frosts. The details are extensive: exact quantities needed, current stockpile assessments, population counts to feed, and specific justifications that might persuade central authorities to release emergency reserves. Not a single word is written down. Repeat it back, the governor commands when he finishes. You close your eyes briefly, accessing the mental palace you've constructed through years of training, and recite the message verbatim, including every number, name, and subtle emphasis. The governor nods with satisfaction. Unlike European counterparts who would dispatch written scrolls, the Inca Empire's administrative communications relied primarily on your phenomenal memory. The lack of a conventional writing system in the Inca Empire remains one of the most fascinating aspects of their civilization to modern scholars. How could an empire administering millions of people across thousands of square miles function without written records? The answer stands before you in the governor's chamber, an extraordinarily sophisticated oral tradition paired with memory techniques refined across generations. Your training included specific visualization methods that modern memory champions would recognize. For each important message component, you create vivid, often bizarre mental images linked to physical locations along familiar routes. As you run, these waypoints in the landscape trigger the associated information. A distinctive boulder might remind you of grain quantities, while a particular mountain view recalls population figures. This method of loci, or memory palace technique, remains one of the most effective memory systems ever developed by humans. Some messages require perfect memorization, while others allow for what scholars call controlled improvisation, preserving essential content while adapting the delivery. You've learned to distinguish which type of message you're carrying. Administrative data typically requires absolute precision, while diplomatic communications might emphasize emotional tone and relationship building over exact wording. One particularly unusual memory aid involves small pebbles or seeds carried in a pouch. Before departing, you arrange them in patterns that correspond to key message elements. During breaks in your journey, you review these arrangements, refreshing your mental storage without relying on external written notes that could be lost or stolen. This system works as a memory trigger rather than a true recording method. The patterns would be meaningless to anyone who hadn't memorized the corresponding information. How many before me have failed to deliver accurately? You once asked your mentor during training. He looked at you gravely. Fewer than you might think. The mind, properly trained, is more reliable than bark or clay. Papers burn, tablets break, but memory, reinforced through systems of retrieval, endures. Historians still argue about whether the Incas' reliance on oral transmission represented a cultural choice or a technological limitation. Some point to the quipu, the system of knotted cords used for numerical recording, as evidence that the Inca were moving toward more complex record keeping, but simply hadn't developed full writing before Spanish contact disrupted their civilization's evolution. When carrying particularly complex messages, you sometimes travel with a quipucamayok, a specialist in the empire's knotted cord recording system. While you memorize the narrative content, these specialists manage numerical data through an intricate system of knots, chord positions, and colors. Together, you form a complementary information package, with your memorized verbal component bringing context and meaning to the quipu's numerical data. The precision required is staggering. A message about grain supplies might include dozens of specific quantities, how much is stored in which facilities, projected consumption rates for different population centers, harvest forecasts for upcoming seasons. You've developed specialized memory techniques for numerical sequences, assigning vivid images to different quantity ranges. When recounting these figures to officials at your destination, your accuracy regularly astonishes them. The first 5 decades of spring wheat harvest from the northern terraces. 2,430 baskets in the first year, 2,690 in the second, 2,105 in the third, affected by late rains, 3,450 in the fourth following terrace expansion, 2,875 in the fifth, with new seed variety. You can recite such sequences flawlessly, even after running 100 miles. not all messages are memorized completely. For standardized communications, like routine tax collection notices or labor draft announcements, you learn templates with customizable sections. This modular approach allows for efficient delivery of common administrative messages while reducing the mental burden of complete memorization for every communication. One fascinating aspect of your training involved developing resistance to interruption. Your instructors would deliberately disrupt your recitations with loud noises, sudden questions, or even physical jostling. This prepared you for delivering messages in chaotic environments, a marketplace, a busy administrative center, or during emergencies when conditions are far from ideal for clear communication. You've learned to partition your mind, keeping the sacred message intact in one chamber while navigating trails, making survival decisions, and interacting with others along your route. This cognitive compartmentalization represents a remarkable feat of mental discipline that few outside the messenger corps can comprehend. As you prepare to depart with the governor's message locked in your memory, you perform a small personal ritual, touching your forehead, lips, and heart in sequence, symbolically sealing the information within your body. Tonight, you'll sleep at a way station halfway to the provincial capital, reviewing the message before rest and immediately upon waking. By tomorrow evening, you'll deliver these unwritten words with perfect fidelity, helping avert potential food shortages for thousands of imperial subjects, all without a single written character changing hands. The air grows noticeably thinner as you ascend the narrow mountain trail, each breath delivering less oxygen than. You're approaching 14,000 feet now, and your body automatically shifts into the high-altitude running technique you've practiced countless times. Shorter strides, controlled nasal breathing, deliberate foot placement on the ancient stone steps that zigzag up the mountainside. The message pouch bounces lightly against your hip, a dispatch from coastal administrators that must reach Cusco within 2 days. Soroche, mountain sickness, is your constant adversary on routes. While your body has adapted remarkably to high elevations through years of training and genetics, you're still fundamentally a human, pushing against biological limits. The headache starts subtly, a faint pressure behind your eyes that could easily be dismissed as simple fatigue. But you recognize the early warning sign and immediately adjust your pace. Modern altitude medicine would identify what's happening. Your blood is desperately trying to capture scarce oxygen molecules, while your brain begins to swell slightly from fluid accumulation. You reach into your small waist pouch and remove a carefully wrapped bundle of coca leaves. Placing several between your cheek and gum, you chew just enough to release the compounds within. The numbness spreads across your mouth as alkaloids enter your bloodstream, dilating blood vessels and temporarily counteracting the worst effects of altitude. Without this sacred plant, considered a gift from the gods, the Empire's vertical messaging system would be nearly impossible to maintain. The foreigners think it's magic, an old messenger once told you with a wheeze-like laugh. They don't understand that the coca leaf doesn't give you supernatural powers. It just lets you keep being human at elevations where the body wants to shut down. Historians still argue about the extent to which coca facilitated Inca administrative control of their vertical empire. Some suggest the plant was as crucial to imperial expansion as horses were to the Mongols, a biological technology that transformed human capabilities in challenging environments. What's certain is that without it, you would be unable to maintain your current pace as the trail climbs ever higher into the rarefied air. A peculiar physical adaptation becomes apparent as you continue your ascent. Your chest appears noticeably broader than lowlanders, with enlarged lung capacity that extracts maximum oxygen from the thin mountain air. Anthropologists have documented this biological response in Andean highland populations. barrel chests with increased lung volume, higher red blood cell counts, and more efficient oxygen transport systems. These adaptations, both genetic and developmental, make you specialized for your environment in ways that astound modern sports physiologists. Near the highest pass, you encounter one of the Empire's unique altitude challenges, transitioning rapidly between ecological zones. In a single day's journey, you might traverse 5 distinct environmental regions, each demanding different running techniques and imposing unique physiological stresses. Spanish chroniclers later marveled at how Andean messengers could sprint from tropical jungle to freezing mountain passes and back again without the debilitating transition sickness that plagued European travelers. You've seen the bodies of those who misjudged their limits. Alongside rarely traveled sections of the imperial highways lie small stone markers commemorating messengers who succumbed to pulmonary edema, their lungs literally drowning from within as fluid leaked into air sacs. It's a particularly cruel fate for those whose lives revolve around breath control and respiratory efficiency. You pause briefly at one such marker, leaving a small offering of coca leaves for a fallen comrade, while silently recommitting to your own careful altitude protocols. One of the more unusual techniques you employ involves a specific breathing pattern developed by highland runners. 4 short inhales through the nose, followed by a complete exhale through pursed lips. This creates a natural form of positive pressure breathing that modern climbers achieve with specialized equipment, helping maintain open airways in the microscopic sacs of your lungs where oxygen transfers to your bloodstream. Research has revealed a fascinating adaptation among native Andean populations. Significantly higher nitric oxide in exhaled breath compared to lowlanders. This natural vasodilator enhances blood flow precisely where it's needed most. Your body, through generations of high-altitude living and your intensive training, produces this compound in quantities that would require pharmaceutical intervention in visitors from lower elevations. Approaching the summit pass, you encounter another sensation familiar to high-altitude messengers, the subtle cognitive impairment that comes with oxygen deprivation. Your thoughts become slightly muddled, reaction time slows, and judgment occasionally falters. This is precisely why message memorization is so heavily drilled during training, creating neural pathways so deeply embedded that they function even when higher cognitive processes begin to deteriorate in the thin air. Remember, your instructor taught during training, when your mind clouds at altitude, trust your body's memory. The message lives in your entire being, not just your thoughts. You've developed a unique mental discipline for these moments, a form of compartmentalized consciousness, where the memorized message remains pristine and isolated from the altitude-affected portions of your thinking. Modern neuroscientists would find this cognitive adaptation fascinating, particularly how it allows complex information to remain intact, even as basic decision-making becomes impaired. Cresting the pass finally, you're rewarded with a view that momentarily distracts from your physical distress. The sacred valley spreads below, patches of terraced farmland climbing the lower slopes like giant steps for the gods. For a brief moment, the pounding headache and burning lungs seem worthwhile just to witness this perspective, reserved for condors and shaskis. But you don't linger. The message waits for no one, and the descent brings its own challenges. Downhill running stresses different muscle groups and joints than the ascent. The pounding impact as you rapidly lose elevation can damage knee cartilage and shred calf muscles if done improperly. You adopt the distinctive downhill technique of Andean messengers, a controlled falling motion with shortened strides and feet landing almost flat rather than heel first. Your weight shifts slightly backward as gravity accelerates your pace to speeds that would terrify untrained runners on such steep, technical terrain. As you descend into thicker air, your symptoms gradually subside, The headache fades, thinking clarifies, and your pace naturally increases as oxygen-rich air fills your lungs. By the time you reach the relay station in the valley below, you've traversed nearly 5,000 feet of elevation change in a single run. The waiting messenger notices your slightly bloodshot eyes, burst capillaries from the elevation stress, but asks no questions as you recite the memorized message with perfect clarity before collapsing onto a sleeping mat for a brief recovery period. For you, this race against mountain sickness is simply another work day in the Empire's communication service. The stone building emerges from gathering dusk just as your energy reserves approach depletion. Your legs tremble slightly with each step. You've maintained a punishing pace for nearly 6 hours across broken terrain. The sight of the tampu, or rest house, sends a wave of relief through your exhausted. These imperial way stations, positioned approximately 12 to 15 miles apart along the royal highways, form the infrastructure backbone that makes the entire messenger system possible. As you approach, the tampu keeper, an elderly man who likely served as a messenger in his youth before age, relegated him to this supportive role, recognizes your official sash immediately. Without a word, he ushers you through the doorway into the simple but meticulously maintained interior. These way stations operate under strict imperial standards, and neglect of facilities meant for official messengers carries severe penalties. Sit, he says, guiding you to a low stone bench near a small fire pit. Food first, then message relay. The tampu system represents one of history's most effective infrastructure networks, with over 1,000 rest houses strategically positioned throughout the Empire's 24,000 miles of road. Modern archaeological excavations have confirmed Spanish accounts of their standardized design, typically constructed with stone walls, thatched roofs, and layouts following consistent imperial specifications, regardless of regional building traditions. The keeper brings you a wooden bowl containing a hearty stew of chuño, freeze-dried potatoes, dried meat, and local vegetables, a carefully calibrated meal that provides rapid energy replenishment without causing digestive discomfort during subsequent running. You eat quickly but methodically, having learned that gulping food too rapidly after extreme exertion often leads to vomiting. A ceramic cup of chicha, a mildly alcoholic corn beverage rich in carbohydrates and B vitamins, accompanies the meal. Modern sports nutritionists would recognize this as a surprisingly effective recovery drink. 2 messengers passed earlier today, informs you between spoonfuls. One carrying census information, another with weather reports for the Agricultural Ministry. This casual intelligence sharing among tampu staff and messengers creates an informal information network that complements the official system. Through brief conversations at rest houses, you often gather contextual knowledge that helps you navigate changing conditions along your routes. A particularly quirky feature of this tampu becomes apparent as you finish eating. Small clay figurines of llamas and alpacas arranged in niches along one wall. The keeper notices your curious glance. My own addition, he explains with a slight smile. I believe they bring good fortune to messengers who rest here. So far, I've lost none to mountain hazards or bandits. While not officially sanctioned, these personal touches within imperial infrastructure reflect the blend of state standardization and local adaptation that characterized much of Inca governance. After your meal, you move to a sleeping area containing several platform beds covered with woven textiles and dried grass padding. The accommodations are simple, but critical to the relay system's functionality. Research has shown that even short periods of horizontal rest dramatically improve recovery between intense exercise bouts, something the Empire understood intuitively long before sports science confirmed it. Historians still argue about whether Tampus served exclusively as messenger rest houses. or had broader functions within imperial infrastructure. Archaeological evidence suggests many larger facilities also functioned as regional storehouses, administrative centers, and accommodations for traveling officials. The intertwined nature of communication, storage, and administrative systems reflects the sophisticated logistical thinking underlying Inca imperial organization. One of the Tampu's most valuable resources becomes apparent when the keeper leads you to a small side room containing clean clothing. Standardized tunics and undergarments precisely like those you're wearing, but dry and unsoiled. You gratefully exchange your sweat-drenched attire for fresh items, knowing they'll be cleaned and available for the next messenger passing through. This clothing exchange system prevented chafing, hypothermia, and skin infections that would otherwise plague runners, covering vast distances in varying weather conditions. There's another messenger due within the hour, the keeper informs you. If your message is heading northwest toward Quito, you can relay it directly rather than continuing onward yourself. This relay capability, transferring memorized information from one runner to the next without written intermediaries, represents perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the imperial communications system. Each tampu serves as both a rest point and information transfer node, allowing messages to travel continuously while individual messengers recover from their segments. Before retiring to rest, you perform a brief but critical duty, entering the tampu's small record room where a resident Quipuca Mayok, not record keeper, maintains a simple log of passing messengers. This isn't a written log, but rather a series of knotted cords recording dates, messenger origins, destinations, and message types. While the specific content of messages remains unrecorded for security reasons, this basic tracking system allows administrators to monitor communication flow throughout the empire. A fascinating aspect of the Tampu network was its adaptive distribution based on terrain difficulty. In relatively flat coastal regions, rest houses might be spaced further apart, up to 20 miles, to reflect the easier running conditions, while in steep mountain zones with oxygen-depleted air, they appeared more frequently. This terrain-responsive spacing optimized the system's efficiency based on human physiological limitations in different environments. As you settle onto the sleeping platform, your body begins the rapid recovery processes, triggered by rest after extreme exertion. Modern athletes call this supercompensation, the biological mechanisms that rebuild muscles stronger than before in response to stress. For you, this is simply the familiar cycle of exertion and recovery that defines messenger life. The next runner arrives just as predicted, his breathing labored from the final climb to the tampu. After a brief meal, he sits across from you on a low bench, making direct eye contact as you carefully recite the message you've carried. He repeats it back verbatim, asking clarifying questions about specific details to ensure perfect transmission. The Quipuca Mayok observes silently, his presence serving as both witness and quality control for this critical information exchange. With your message successfully transferred, you can now rest until morning, when you'll return along your assigned route to your home station. The nighttime tampu grows quiet, except for the soft sounds of sleeping messengers, and the occasional movements of the keeper tending the small fire. Outside, the vast Andean night spreads across imperial highways that stretch thousands of miles in every direction, roads connecting distant peoples and environments through the remarkable human relay system that you serve. Your aching muscles gradually relax as sleep approaches, your body already preparing for tomorrow's return journey along the endless highways that bind together the largest empire in pre-Columbian America. The Quipuca Mayok sits before you, his weathered hands manipulating a complex arrangement of knotted cords with practiced precision. You've been summoned to receive not just a verbal message, but a quipu, one of the mysterious knotted devices that serve as the Empire's primary recording system. As a messenger specially trained in quipu transport, you occupy an elite position even among the already select Shaski Corps. This is tax information from the northern provinces, the record keeper explains, his fingers hovering over different sections of the colourful cord array. The primary cord indicates regional totals, while these subsidiary cords show contributions by individual communities. Samapai. You pay careful attention as he walks you through the specific meaning encoded in this particular quipu. While you can't read it with the depth of understanding that specialists possess, you've been trained to recognize basic patterns and protect the information's integrity during. The knots and their positions represent numerical data, a surprisingly sophisticated decimal system that allowed Inca administrators to record astonishingly precise statistics. Modern researchers have confirmed that quipus primarily functioned as numerical records rather than narrative texts. The knots encode numbers using a base 10 positional system that European mathematicians would find remarkably familiar, a long knot representing tens, a figure 8 knot for hundreds, and clusters of simple knots indicating single units. Position along the cord indicates place value, creating a recording system that could express numbers into the thousands with perfect clarity. Remember, the Quipucamayok cautions, this particular quipu contains sensitive information about regional productivity. It must reach Cusco untampered and intact. The colors of the cords add another layer of meaning, a complex coding system that modern scholars have only partially deciphered. Red cords often related to warfare or military information, yellow to gold and precious metals, green to agricultural data, and white to peace or religious matters. The arrangement of subsidiary cords dangling from main cords created hierarchical relationships between different data points. You carefully place the quipu in a specially designed carrying case that protects it from moisture and physical damage during transport. Unlike verbal messages that exist only in memory, these knotted records represent physical embodiments of imperial information, vulnerable to both accidental damage and intentional tampering. One particularly quirky aspect of quipu communication involves what anthropologists call structural redundancy, the practice of creating duplicate records as insurance against loss. In some cases, you'll carry the same numerical information encoded in different formats, the primary quipu accompanied by a simplified backup version that contains essential totals but omits subsidiary detail. This ancient form of data redundancy protected against information loss in a system without paper copy. As you prepare for departure, the Quipucamayok performs a final check of the knots, then seals the carrying case with a distinctive cord pattern that would make tampering evident. Specialists could detect even subtle modifications to knot patterns, serving as an early form of information security in an empire obsessed with accurate record keeping. Historians still argue about the full capabilities of quipu communication. Some controversial theories suggest these knotted devices might have encoded narrative information beyond mere numbers, perhaps functioning as a form of three-dimensional writing that modern researchers haven't fully decoded. Others maintain they were primarily numerical with limited categorical information, pointing to the absence of consistent phonetic or syllabic patterns that would indicate true writing. The quipu speaks through your voice, your instructor once explained during training. This cryptic statement referred to a fascinating aspect of Inca information management, the complementary relationship between knotted records and oral recitation. When delivering a quipu to high officials, you don't simply hand over the object, you provide vital contextual information that brings meaning to the numerical data. The knots record quantities and categories, while your memorized narrative explains what the numbers represent. You secure the carrying case to your body using a special harness that distributes weight evenly while preventing the delicate cords from being crushed during running. Unlike verbal messages, quipus cannot be transferred from messenger to messenger at Tampus. They must be physically transported from origin to destination by a single carrier or a carefully managed chain of custody. The mnemonic techniques you use for verbal messages prove equally valuable when transporting quipus. You memorize key totals from the knotted record as a verification mechanism, allowing recipients to quickly confirm that the physical record matches its expected values before conducting detailed analysis. This hybrid system of physical recording and memory backup created remarkable information fidelity across vast distances. "What happens if I lose it?" you once asked during training, voicing the fear that haunts all quipu messengers. "The Empire loses its memory," came the grave response. "Without our records, we cannot govern justly or effectively. The quipu is the Empire's mind externalized." Archaeological discoveries have unearthed quipus, recording an astonishing range of administrative data. Census information tracking population by age, gender, and occupation. Agricultural yields from specific fields over multiple years. Labor tax obligations for thousands of households. And inventory records for state storehouses containing millions of items. The system's sophistication enabled governance of an empire encompassing millions of subjects without conventional writing. As you begin your journey with the precious information literally wrapped around your body, you reflect on the responsibility you carry. The quipu represents years of data collection, carefully encoded by specialists who devoted their lives to mastering this complex recording system. Modern data scientists would recognize familiar principles in this ancient practice: concerns about information integrity, transmission protocols, redundancy, and verification methods that remain relevant in today's digital world. Your route takes you through mountainous terrain, where verbal messengers typically stick to established paths. But as a quipu carrier, you sometimes use alternative routes known only to specialized couriers, paths that might be longer but offer additional security against interception. The Empire understood that different types of information required different security protocols, creating specialized handling procedures for particularly sensitive records. At night in the Tampu, you sleep with the quipu case secured to your body. Unlike ordinary messengers who might transfer their memorized content to the next runner, you must personally deliver this physical record to its destination. The knots must reach the hands of imperial administrators who possess the specialized knowledge to fully interpret their meaning, transforming these humble cords into the lifeblood of imperial governance. Tomorrow, you'll continue your journey toward Cusco, carrying in your hands not merely a collection of knotted strings, but the administrative foundation that makes governing such a vast, diverse empire possible. In a world without paper or conventional writing, these intricate knots represent one of history's most ingenious solutions to the challenge of information management across time and space. The scout bursts into the Tampu, his breathing ragged from sprinting the final distance. "Enemy forces!" he gasps between gulps of air. "Northern border!" Within moments, you're summoned by the local military commander. As he rapidly details the situation, a large-scale rebellion has erupted in a recently conquered province, with rebel forces moving south toward a vulnerable imperial outpost. You understand why you've been called. This information must reach the capital with unprecedented speed, triggering immediate military response. "How quickly can you deliver this to Cusco?" the commander asks, his expression grave. 2 days, you respond without hesitation. The distance would normally require 4 days of relay messaging, but in military emergencies, The Empire activates what Spanish chroniclers would later call the flying messengers, elite runners capable of maintaining extraordinary speed over challenging terrain, using specialized routes and protocols that prioritize velocity above all else. Your speed across the Empire's vertical landscape represents one of history's most remarkable communication achievements. Consider that the famous ride of Paul Revere, celebrated in American history, covered approximately 20 miles in one night, while Pheidippides' legendary marathon from Marathon to Athens spanned roughly 26 miles. By contrast, urgent imperial messages like the one you now carry could travel 150-200 miles per day through the relay system, a pace that astonished European observers when they first encountered it. We'll dispatch multiple messengers along different routes, the commander decides, implementing standard protocol for critical military intelligence. This redundancy ensured that even if one messenger fell to accident or enemy interception, the information would still reach its destination. In modern terms, this represents an early form of packet-switched communication, dividing critical data across multiple transmission paths to ensure delivery. One particularly quirky aspect of military messaging becomes apparent as the commander provides not one but 3 versions of the message, each phrased differently but containing identical core information. You're instructed to memorize all 3 variants and alternate between them when transferring. This sophisticated countermeasure protected against intelligence leaks through pattern analysis. If enemy spies monitored messenger traffic, they wouldn't hear the same message repeated verbatim along the routes, making it harder to identify critical communications through repetition. You depart immediately, carrying nothing but the clothes on your back and a small pouch of coca leaves. In military emergencies, you travel lighter than standard messengers, sacrificing comfort for speed. The first stretch takes you up a punishing mountain pass where the air thins rapidly with elevation gain. Your specialized training for emergency messaging now proves crucial. You've mastered techniques for maintaining maximum sustainable speed rather than conserving energy for multiple day journeys. Historians still argue about the top speeds attained by the Empire's messengers during military Spanish accounts describe runners covering distances that seem almost superhuman. One chronicle mentions a message traveling from Quito to Cusco over 1,000 miles in just 6 days during a rebellion. While some scholars dismiss such accounts as exaggeration, modern ultra-endurance athletes have demonstrated that similar performances are indeed physiologically possible with appropriate training and support infrastructure. At the first relay station, you don't enter the tampu, but instead sound a distinctive signal call that immediately brings the next runner outside. This emergency protocol eliminates precious minutes otherwise spent inside the station. The relay runner meets you on the trail itself, jogging in place to keep muscles warm as you rapidly transfer both the core message and contextual details about enemy. Within moments, he's sprinting toward the next station, while you collapse briefly to recover before returning to your assigned post. The military messenger system operated parallel to, but distinct from, the standard administrative communication network. Specialized runners stationed at strategic locations remained in constant readiness for emergency deployment, creating what military historians recognize as an early strategic warning system capable of reporting threats across vast distances with remarkable speed. Your training for military messaging included memorizing alternative routes invisible to casual observation, narrow paths that bypass normal tampas, and cut directly across terrain too challenging for standard travel. These emergency routes sometimes traversed seemingly impassable landscapes, narrow ledges above sheer drops, rudimentary rope bridges spanning gorges, or paths through territories inhabited by hostile unincorporated tribes. The risks were justified by the precious hours saved during military emergencies. One fascinating aspect of the military communication system was its integration with the Empire's extensive network of signal towers positioned on hilltops throughout the realm. In regions with suitable terrain, these towers could transmit simple coded messages using smoke signals during daylight or fire at night, creating what modern communications specialists would recognize as a hybrid system, combining physical messengers with primitive visual telegraphy. The message you've helped launch will ripple outward through the communication network in concentric circles of increasing urgency. Subordinate messages will branch from the main alert, orders recalling off-duty soldiers to their garrisons, instructions for storehouses to prepare military rations, commands for provincial leaders to muster local militia forces. Within hours of your initial relay, thousands of Imperial subjects will be mobilizing in response, despite being hundreds of miles from both the threat and the central authority. This capacity for rapid military response through sophisticated communication gave the Inca Empire a decisive advantage in controlling its vast territory. European observers, accustomed to the weeks or months required for military intelligence to travel similar distances in their home countries, marveled at how quickly the Inca could identify and respond to threats at their far-flung borders. As one Spanish chronicler noted with undisguised admiration, before the rebels had finished raising their weapons, the Emperor's response was already racing toward them. By nightfall, your specific role in this emergency transmission is complete. You've returned to your assigned station, muscles aching from the extraordinary effort, but satisfied knowing that the Empire's remarkable communication system is now fully activated. The message continues its journey without you, handed from runner to runner like a sacred torch, outpacing any enemy movement by days rather. In your tampu that evening, runners discuss the developing situation based on fragments of information gleaned during their various transmissions. This informal intelligence sharing among messengers created a distributed awareness of empire-wide development, allowing the communication system to continuously adapt to changing circumstances without centralized micromanagement. Tomorrow, you'll resume your regular messaging duties, perhaps carrying routine administrative communications or census data. But for today, you've participated in one of history's most remarkable military communication achievements, a system that could transmit critical intelligence across a mountainous empire at speeds that wouldn't be surpassed until the invention of the telegraph nearly 4 centuries later. The regional governor finishes speaking, his voice dropping to a near whisper as he delivers the final portion of the message. You maintain perfect stillness, your face revealing nothing, despite the shocking nature of what you've just heard. This isn't standard administrative communication, but something far more dangerous. Confidential intelligence about suspected disloyalty among provincial nobles. The information is so sensitive that it travels outside the normal messaging protocols, entrusted only to messengers with the highest security clearance. You will deliver this verbally, only to the Emperor's third counselor, the governor instructs, to no one else, regardless of their rank or authority. You will travel as an ordinary messenger carrying routine tax records. You nod once, understanding the deadly serious nature of this assignment. While most Imperial communications flow through established channels with multiple messengers and formal transfers, the most sensitive information travels through what modern intelligence agencies would recognize as compartmentalized routes, isolated from the broader system to prevent leak. The Empire's communication network didn't merely transmit routine administrative data. It formed the backbone of an impressive intelligence apparatus that maintained Imperial control through information dominance. As a trusted messenger occasionally assigned to these special routes, you serve as what modern analysts would call a human intelligence asset, a secure conduit for information too sensitive for standard transmission methods. Memorize this, the governor says, handing you a small quipu with unusually patterned knots. Then destroy it before departure. This represents one of the quipu system's most closely guarded applications: encryption. Certain high-ranking officials used specialized knot patterns comprehensible only to the intended recipient, creating what cryptographers would recognize as a primitive but effective encryption method. You've been trained to transport these security quipus without understanding their content, memorizing the pattern visually without knowing its meaning. A particularly quirky aspect of confidential messaging involves what anthropologists call steganography, hiding the very existence of secret communication. You'll travel with several obvious quipus containing mundane information, while the critical intelligence remains hidden in your memory alone. If intercepted, the visible messages serve as convincing decoys while revealing nothing of your true purpose. Historians still argue about the sophistication of Inca counterintelligence operations. Some scholars suggest the empire maintained dedicated security messengers who traveled disguised as ordinary shaskis, but reported directly to the emperor's personal intelligence advisor. Others propose that trustworthy messengers from the standard corps were simply selected for sensitive assignments as needed. What's clear from Spanish accounts is that the imperial communication system successfully maintained operational security across enormous distances in ways that impressed even European observers familiar with Renaissance-era espionage techniques. You depart at dawn, dressed identically to regular messengers and carrying the decoy quipus prominently displayed. Nothing in your appearance distinguishes you from dozens of other runners moving along the imperial highways on routine business. This anonymity provides your first layer of protection, hiding sensitive communications amid the constant flow of ordinary message traffic. The route you've been instructed to take subtly differs from standard paths. You'll avoid certain major tampus, known to be gathering points for regional officials, instead utilizing smaller way stations frequented primarily by messengers. This reduces opportunities for interception or questioning by authorities who might unwittingly compromise your mission through routine inquiries. Trust no one, your security trainer once advised during specialized instruction for confidential messengers. Even innocent questions from fellow runners could reveal patterns that compromise sensitive operations. This compartmentalization of information, keeping different aspects of imperial communication isolated from each other, reflects surprisingly modern security principles. Spanish accounts note with admiration how Inca administrators maintained information discipline across vast distances without modern surveillance capability. Messages about military movements, tax collection, and political intelligence all traveled through the same physical infrastructure while remaining operationally separated. At night in the Tampu, you maintain the careful performance of an ordinary messenger while remaining vigilant. These way stations, while primarily service infrastructure, occasionally housed individuals with complex motivations, provincial officials traveling incognito, merchants with foreign connections, or regional nobles nurturing ambitions beyond their assigned status. Your training included recognizing subtle indicators of people showing too much interest in messenger activity. One fascinating aspect of confidential messaging involved what intelligence professionals call dead drops and cutouts. In particularly sensitive situations, you might be instructed to leave information at predetermined locations. This created additional security by eliminating direct contact between information sources and high-value targets like imperial administrators. Spanish chronicles describe sites like distinctive boulders, hollow trees, or small caves near highways that served as information exchange points, allowing messages to travel between parties who never physically met. The psychological burden of carrying sensitive information weighs heavily as you continue your journey. Unlike routine administrative messaging, where inaccuracy represents the primary concern, Confidential communication introduces additional stresses: constant vigilance against interception, the need to maintain perfect cover identity, and awareness that the information you carry could result in executions or political purges if it reaches its intended recipient. The messengers who disappear was how veteran runners sometimes referred to those who carried the most sensitive intelligence. The phrase acknowledged a dark reality. Messengers entrusted with particularly dangerous information occasionally vanished without explanation, their fates unknown to their colleagues. Modern intelligence analysts would recognize this as plausible deniability and operational security needed for the Empire's most sensitive communication. Perhaps most remarkable was the Empire's ability to maintain secrecy within a system that lacked written encryption. Without ciphers or coded documents, the Inca nevertheless created effective information security through careful compartmentalization, need-to-know protocols, and specialized training for messengers handling sensitive content. The human memory, properly trained and disciplined, proved surprisingly secure against both casual interception and dedicated intelligence gathering by rivals. By the third day of your journey, you approach the capital region, where security measures intensify. Imperial guard posts check messengers more thoroughly, verifying identities and questioning travel purposes. Your cover story, delivering routine provincial tax records, holds up under casual scrutiny, particularly when supported by the decoy quipus you carry openly. The truly sensitive information remains locked in your memory, inaccessible to anyone lacking specific authorization phrases. The Imperial Palace complex comes into view by mid-afternoon, its massive stone walls reflecting the concentrated power of the Empire. Unlike ordinary messengers who report to administrative centers within the city, your instructions direct you to a nondescript building near the palace perimeter. Here, the Emperor's third counselor maintains offices ostensibly dedicated to agricultural record-keeping, but actually serving as a collection point for sensitive intelligence from throughout the realm. As you're ushered into a private chamber, the counselor dismisses all attendants before receiving your message. You recite the confidential information in precisely the sequence and wording memorized days earlier, including the coded reference phrases that authenticate you as a legitimate confidential messenger, rather than an imposter or compromised agent. The counselor listens impassively, asking no questions until you've completed the full transmission. "You have served the Empire with distinction," he finally says, offering no indication of how the sensitive information will be used. "Rest tonight. Tomorrow, you will carry routine administrative messages back to your province. Your special assignment complete, you'll return to standard messaging duties without knowing the consequences of the intelligence you've delivered." This deliberate limitation of knowledge, ensuring that even trusted messengers know only what's necessary for their specific tasks, represents another sophisticated security principle that protected the Empire's most sensitive communications from compromise. The morning frost has barely melted when you set out on your assigned route, a journey that will take you through some of the Empire's most challenging terrain. Inside your small waist pouch rest two essential tools of your profession: a carefully measured ration of coca leaves and a pair of spare usuta, the remarkably engineered sandals that serve as your primary equipment in the messenger service. You place a few coca leaves in your mouth, tucking them between your cheek and gum, where they'll slowly release their compounds through. The relationship between Andean messengers and the coca plant represents one of history's most fascinating examples of botanical knowledge supporting. The leaves contain more than a dozen alkaloids that work synergistically to provide the sustained energy, altitude sickness prevention, and appetite suppression that make your demanding profession possible. "Foreigners think we chew it to escape reality," an elder messenger once told you. But for us, it does the opposite. It allows us to endure reality when ordinary human limits would force. Spanish chroniclers noted with astonishment how Inca messengers could run for days with minimal food, attributing almost supernatural powers to the coca leaf. Modern pharmacology has confirmed the remarkable properties of this plant. It provides a unique combination of mild stimulation without the jittery side effects of stronger stimulants, pain reduction without sedation, and metabolic effects that enhance fat utilization during prolonged exercise. As you settle into your stride, the familiar subtle warmth spreads through your body. Not an intoxicating high, but rather a gentle lifting of physical limitations. Historians still argue about whether coca use was widespread throughout Inca society, or carefully regulated for specific roles like messengers and miners working at extreme altitudes. Archaeological evidence suggests the plant held sacred status, with coca leaves appearing as offerings at important religious sites and ceremonial burials. For messengers, however, it was fundamentally practical, a biological technology that extended human endurance beyond normal limits. Your feet land rhythmically on the stone-paved royal road, protected by your Usuta sandals. These seemingly simple footwear items represent generations of design refinement specifically for the empire's communication needs. The soles, made from thick, layered llama hide, provide remarkable durability while remaining flexible enough for precise foot placement on varied terrain. The upper portions use woven plant fibers arranged to prevent chafing during long-distance running, an engineering solution to the blister problem that plagues many modern endurance athletes despite high-tech materials. A particularly quirky aspect of messenger equipment involves what anthropologists call adaptive recycling. The Usuta sandals wear out regularly, typically every 150-200 miles of mountain running, but the materials don't go to waste. Worn-out sandal soles find new life as padding in tampu sleeping areas, while the fiber straps are unraveled and rewoven into small storage bags. This circular economy approach minimized resource use while ensuring messengers always had access to fresh equipment. 3 days in good sandals beats 1 day barefoot, goes a common saying among messengers, emphasizing how critical this basic equipment is to your profession. You typically carry at least 1 spare pair, sometimes 2 for particularly remote routes where replacement would be impossible. The Empire maintained specialized craftspeople who produced nothing but messenger sandals to exacting standards, creating an early example of specialized equipment manufacturing for a critical infrastructure service. Beyond coca and sandals, your survival kit remains deliberately minimal. A small water container made from a dried gourd, a woven bag containing high-energy food like dried meat and toasted corn, and perhaps a thin blanket for high-altitude nights. This lightweight approach maximizes speed and endurance, while providing just enough survival margin for emergencies. Modern ultramarathon runners would recognize this philosophy of carrying only the essentials while relying on aid stations, tampus in your case, for major resupply. One fascinating aspect of messenger equipment involves what ethnobotanists call field pharmacy. You carry small amounts of medicinal plants specific to your assigned routes. Herbs that combat digestive issues common at high altitudes, poultices for blisters or muscle strains, and plants that help prevent infection in minor wounds. This regionally adapted medical knowledge reflects sophisticated understanding of how environmental challenges vary across the Empire's diverse ecosystems. The coca supply chain supporting the messenger network represented a remarkable logistical achievement. The plant grows only in specific middle elevation zones on the eastern Andean slopes, the warm, humid Montana region, but was needed throughout the Empire's communications system. Special plantations dedicated to messenger supply ensured consistent quality and quantity, with elaborate preservation techniques maintaining potency during transport to arid highlands, where most messaging routes operated. The leaf connects the realms, your instructor explained during training, referring to how coca physically originated in the eastern jungle regions, but enabled communication across the high mountain spine of the empire. This biological connection between distinct ecological zones reflected the Inca worldview that saw different environments as complementary parts of a unified whole rather than separate territories. Research has revealed that messengers received specific coca preparation training, learning to identify optimal leaf maturity, proper drying techniques to preserve active compounds, and appropriate consumption methods for different running conditions. Modern studies confirm these traditional practices significantly affect the bioavailability of the plant's beneficial compounds. When preparing your daily supply, you carefully select leaves based on color and flexibility, discarding those too young or too old for optimal effect. By midday, you've covered nearly 20 miles of mountainous terrain, maintaining a steady pace that balances speed with sustainable energy output. As you approach a small stream crossing, you pause briefly to adjust your sandals, preventative maintenance that experienced messengers perform regularly. You check for loose straps that might cause blisters, examine the soles for excessive wear patterns, and reposition the padded areas to correspond with pressure points on your feet. This relationship between messenger and equipment reflects a sophisticated understanding of how small maintenance issues can cascade into major problems during extended journeys. Modern performance athletes and military units have rediscovered this wisdom, emphasizing preventative equipment checks as essential to mission success rather than merely convenient when time allows. As afternoon approaches, you notice your coca supply running lower than expected for this stage of the journey. This triggers a series of mental calculations about pacing, remaining distance, and energy management that would impress modern sports physiologists. You adjust your running form slightly to improve efficiency, modify your breathing pattern to conserve energy, and mentally map alternate routes that might intersect with Tampus, not on your original itinerary, but which could provide resupply. This adaptive problem-solving represents another crucial aspect of messenger training, the ability to recalculate routes and resources while maintaining mission integrity. The Empire's communication system succeeded not through rigid procedures, but through highly trained messengers, making informed decisions based on changing conditions. Your equipment limitations don't reduce effectiveness, because you've developed the judgment to optimize their use across varying circumstances. As evening approaches, you reach a high mountain pass where travelers traditionally leave small offerings at a stone cairn marking the boundary between administrative regions. You pause briefly, placing 3 coca leaves beneath a stone, a gesture acknowledging both practical and spiritual dimensions of your equipment. The leaves that physically enable your journey also connect you to divine forces believed to protect travelers in these liminal mountain spaces. Tomorrow, you'll continue toward your destination, your basic but remarkably specialized equipment, allowing you to traverse landscapes that would defeat most travelers. The Empire's communication network didn't succeed through technological complexity, but rather through deep understanding of how to optimize fundamental tools, coca leaves and sandals, for extraordinary performance in one of Earth's most challenging environments. The mountain path narrows dangerously as you approach the rope bridge, spanning a gorge so deep that the river below appears as merely a silver thread. The message you carry, a warning about unusual weather patterns threatening high-altitude crops, must reach the Agricultural Ministry within 2 days. The normal route would take you north around this treacherous canyon, adding nearly a day to your journey. The direct path across the swaying rope bridge saves critical time but has claimed the lives of several messengers during the rainy season. You hesitate only briefly before stepping onto the swaying structure. The Empire's need for this information outweighs personal safety, a calculation you've made countless times throughout your career. The lives of thousands depend on timely agricultural adjustments, and your potential sacrifice represents an acceptable cost within the Imperial communication system's unforgiving mathematics. Some messages are worth dying for, your mentor once told you during training. Not all, but you must learn to recognize which ones justify the ultimate risk. This utilitarian approach to messenger mortality reflects the Empire's pragmatic information priorities. While the Inca valued their communication specialists and invested heavily in their training, the system accepted casualties as an inevitable cost of maintaining imperial control across such challenging territory. Spanish chronicles record that messengers who died in service received special burial honors, with small monuments sometimes marking locations where runners fell while performing their duties. The wind gusts suddenly as you reach the bridge's midpoint, causing the structure to sway alarmingly. Your hands grip the guide ropes with white-knuckle intensity, while your feet instinctively find stable placement on the narrow walkway. You've received specific training for rope bridge crossings, keeping your center of gravity low, moving rhythmically with the bridge's natural oscillations rather than fighting against them, and maintaining forward momentum even when instinct screams to freeze in place. Historians still argue about mortality rates among imperial messengers. Conservative estimates suggest 5 to 10% of Chasqui died during active service, while higher estimates range up to 25% in particularly dangerous regions. Archaeological evidence from messenger remains shows patterns of stress injuries consistent with extreme physical demands, expanded heart chambers, enlarged lung capacity, and distinctive bone remodeling in the legs that modern sports medicine would associate with repetitive impact trauma. As you reach the safety of the opposite cliff, your breathing gradually steadies. This wasn't your first close encounter with death in service to the Empire's communication needs. Last rainy season, you narrowly escaped a landslide that buried a section of highway moments after you passed. 3 months ago, you survived hypothermia after being caught in an unexpected high-altitude snowstorm while carrying census data across a remote mountain pass. A particularly quirky aspect of messenger mortality involves what anthropologists call information triage, the practice of messengers making life or death decisions based on message importance. When facing potentially fatal conditions, you've been trained to evaluate whether the specific information you carry justifies the risk. Routine administrative communications might warrant taking shelter during dangerous weather, while military intelligence or famine warnings would justify pushing forward regardless of personal danger. If you must choose between the message and your life, your instructor taught, consider first whether other messengers carry duplicate information. Second, whether the content affects many lives or few. And third, whether the timing is critical or flexible. This systematic approach to risk assessment reflects the sophisticated information management principles underlying the seemingly simple relay system. Modern emergency services and military communications use similar protocols, acknowledging that information transmission sometimes requires human sacrifice when the collective benefit is sufficiently high. The Empire maintained detailed records of messenger casualties, using quippers to track deaths by region, cause, and message type. This data informed continuous system improvements, relocating particularly dangerous trail sections, adjusting scheduling to avoid seasonal hazards, and enhancing training for specific environmental challenges. The communication network functioned as a learning system, becoming safer and more efficient through analytical use of mortality information. Your narrow escape at the bridge will become part of this institutional knowledge. At the next Tampu, You'll report the dangerous wind conditions to the station keeper, who will temporarily restrict bridge crossings during similar weather patterns. Future messengers will benefit from your experience without having to personally discover the hazard, an early form of organizational learning that modern safety systems would recognize as accident prevention through near-miss reporting. One fascinating aspect of messenger mortality involved what cultural historians call status compensation, the social mechanisms that made potentially fatal service appealing despite its risks. While messengers faced higher death rates than many imperial subjects, they also received special privileges, including exemption from other labor taxes, preferential food allocations, and distinct social status. Perhaps most importantly, the families of messengers who died in service received continuing imperial support, rather than losing their provider's economic contribution without compensation. Better to die with purpose than live without meaning, goes a saying attributed to veteran messengers. This philosophical approach to occupational risk reflects how the profession incorporated danger into its identity rather than merely enduring it. Modern high-risk occupations like firefighting or military special operations often develop similar cultural frameworks that transform potential death from deterrent to affirmation of purpose. Research has revealed sophisticated risk mitigation strategies embedded within the messaging system. The Empire maintained detailed environmental intelligence about route conditions, with specialized weather observers at mountain passes reporting early storm warnings and dedicated trail monitors identifying hazards before they claimed messenger lives. This preventative approach reduced casualties while maintaining communication speed, demonstrating administrative sophistication that belies the system's technological simplicity. By sunset, you've reached a tampu where the keeper recognizes your exhaustion and immediately provides restorative food and drink. As you recover, you exchange information with other messengers about conditions along various routes. A landslide 3 days south, unusually early snow on the high northern passes, a section of flooding along the coastal highway. This informal hazard reporting network functioned alongside official communication channels, creating a continuously updated risk map available to all messengers passing through the station. Shaski die, so information may live, you were told during your initiation ceremony. Tonight, resting safely after your brush with death at the rope bridge, you reflect on this institutional philosophy. The Empire's remarkable communication achievements came at a cost measured in messenger lives, a calculation made by administrators who recognized that information movement across such challenging terrain inevitably required human sacrifice. Tomorrow, you'll continue your journey, the agricultural warning still secured in your Perhaps this particular message truly justifies the risk you took at the bridge. Early crop adjustments might prevent famine conditions that would claim far more lives than those lost in the messaging system. Or perhaps it doesn't, and your near-death experience represents one of countless unnecessary risks taken by messengers. What's certain is that you'll face similar calculations repeatedly throughout your career. Balancing message importance against personal survival in a communication system where information transmission occasionally requires the ultimate sacrifice. The Empire's rope bridges, mountain passes, flash flood ravines, and snake-infested jungle trails will claim some of your colleagues this year, as they do every year. Whether your name eventually joins the honored dead depends partly on skill and partly on the cruel mathematics of probability across thousands of miles of the world's most challenging messaging territory. The narrow trail hugs the mountainside as you maintain a steady pace, eyes constantly scanning for threats both natural and human. This particular route is notorious among messengers for bandit activity. Former miners and displaced farmers who target imperial communications, sometimes for the valuable quipus they might carry. other times under the direction of rebellious local lords seeking to disrupt imperial governance. You've taken precautions for this section, traveling during daylight hours, carrying minimal equipment that might attract attention, and adopting the slightly altered running gait that experienced messengers use when passing through dangerous territories. This modified stride allows for sudden direction changes and rapid acceleration if threats appear, sacrificing some efficiency for tactical readiness. The message faces 3 enemies, your security instructor once explained. The land itself, which tries to kill you through exposure and accident. Your own body, which betrays you through fatigue and injury. And human adversaries, who see imperial information as valuable prey. This trilogy of threats shapes every aspect of messenger operations in contested regions. Spanish chronicles record that Chasqui received specific training in evasion techniques, emergency route alternatives, and even basic defensive tactics, creating what modern security professionals would recognize as a comprehensive approach to information protection. A movement in the brush ahead catches your attention, triggering an immediate response drilled through countless simulations. You veer slightly off the main trail without breaking stride, putting a large boulder between yourself and the potential threat while maintaining forward progress. The deviation looks natural, as if you're simply avoiding rough terrain rather than implementing a security protocol, but effectively creates distance from the ambush point if that's what you've detected. Historians still argue about the frequency and organization of attacks on Imperial messengers. Some scholars suggest that bandits operated opportunistically, targeting isolated runners carrying visible valuables, while others propose the existence of organized resistance groups that specifically disrupted communication lines to undermine Imperial control. Archaeological evidence supports both interpretations, with certain regions showing patterns of messenger way stations fortified against systematic attacks. You scan the surrounding terrain for the distinctive signs of recent human activity that might indicate bandit presence. Freshly broken vegetation, disturbed dust patterns on rocks, or subtle trail modifications that could funnel travelers into vulnerable position. Your training included recognizing these environmental indicators, transforming the natural landscape into an information system that warns of potential threat. One particularly quirky aspect of anti-bandit tactics involves what security specialists call security through obscurity, deliberately varying routes and schedules to prevent predictable patterns that attackers could exploit. Unlike administrative messengers who follow regular timetables, security priority runners like yourself frequently use minor trails, change crossing points at rivers, and vary your tampu stops to create uncertainty for potential interceptors. The predictable messenger dies, goes a saying among veterans of dangerous routes. This wisdom reflects the sophisticated understanding that information security sometimes requires sacrificing efficiency for protection, a principle that modern computer security experts apply to digital communications facing similar, if less physically violent, threats. As you round a bend in the trail, you encounter another Imperial messenger heading in the opposite direction. The brief exchange that follows represents one of the messenger system's most effective security protocols: rapid intelligence sharing about route conditions. In less than 30 seconds, while barely breaking stride, you exchange critical information. A suspicious group of men spotted near the river crossing 2 hours south. A military patrol operating near the provincial border. Heavy rains making the lower trail impassable. This distributed threat awareness created a remarkably adaptive security system. Without centralized coordination, messengers continuously updated their collective understanding of dangerous areas, allowing each runner to make informed risk decisions based on near real-time intelligence. Modern security experts would recognize this as an early implementation of crowdsourced threat intelligence, using the observations of many individuals to create a comprehensive security picture no single observer could assemble. Beyond human threats, you remain vigilant for the Empire's apex predator, the mountain lion whose territory overlaps with numerous messaging routes. Attacks on runners occur infrequently, but with sufficient regularity that specific defensive techniques form part of standard messenger training. You carry a sturdy walking stick that doubles as a defensive implement, and you've practiced the intimidation posture that sometimes discourages predator attacks, making yourself appear larger while producing the distinctive whistling sound that experienced messengers use to signal aggression rather than fear. Research has revealed that messengers developed sophisticated animal-specific defensive strategies based on accumulated experience. For snake-heavy jungle regions, runners wore thicker leg wrappings and carried specific medicinal plants that could delay venom effects. In areas with aggressive Andean bears, messengers traveled in pairs during mating season when attacks increased. This regionally adaptive approach to animal threats reflects the system's emphasis on practical solutions based on empirical observation rather than superstition. Another fascinating aspect of messenger security involved what anthropologists call social camouflage, the ability to blend into local populations when necessary. In regions with known bandit activity, you've been trained to temporarily abandon the distinctive messenger appearance if needed, adopting local dress and speech patterns to move undetected through potentially hostile communities. Some messengers learned multiple regional dialects specifically for these security situations, allowing them to pass as local travelers rather than imperial representatives when circumstances required. As afternoon transitions toward evening, you increase your pace to reach the next tampu before darkness provides cover for potential ambushes. Night travel through bandit territories represents an unacceptable risk, except for the most critical military or succession-related messages. The Imperial communication system generally acknowledged this security limitation, adjusting message prioritization to avoid requiring night travel through known danger zones. The tampu appears in the distance, just as the sun touches the western mountains. Unlike standard way stations, this facility includes defensive features specific to high-risk regions, a stone wall surrounding the compound, elevated platforms for monitoring approaching travelers, and housing for a small detachment of Imperial guards who protect both the station and messengers resting within. These security-enhanced tampus appeared with greater frequency in border regions, recently conquered territories, and areas with histories of rebellion against imperial authority. Inside the secure compound, you exchange information with the station keeper about conditions along your route. This formal security reporting supplements the informal messenger-to-messenger intelligence sharing, creating what military analysts would recognize as layered intelligence collection, multiple information streams combined to form a comprehensive threat assessment. The keeper records specific threat information on a security quipu, tracking incident patterns over time to identify emerging threats before they claim messenger casualties. Tonight, you sleep with one eye open, despite the tampu's defenses. Experience has taught you that safety is relative in the messaging service, and tomorrow's route includes several segments notorious for both animal predators and human bandits. The vital information you carry, updates to regional tax obligations following a local natural disaster, must reach its destination despite these threats, requiring continuous vigilance until delivery. As you drift toward restless sleep, you reflect on the paradoxical nature of your profession's security challenges. The Empire's communication system succeeds largely because of its predictability and reliability, messages flowing along established routes through standardized infrastructure. Yet this very predictability creates vulnerability to interception and disruption. Navigating this tension between operational consistency and security adaptation represents one of the most sophisticated aspects of your training, knowing when to follow protocols and when to improvise for survival. You crouch silently on a ridge overlooking the provincial governor's compound, watching as imperial officials confer in the central courtyard below. Though technically still on messenger duty, this moment represents one of the more unusual aspects of your role, gathering observational intelligence during your travels. While your primary function remains message delivery, experienced Chasqui serve as the Empire's eyes and ears, reporting notable observations from distant provinces that might otherwise escape imperial attention. The messenger sees more than the message, goes a saying among veteran runners. This unofficial intelligence gathering function transformed the communication system into something far more sophisticated than mere information transport. It became the Empire's distributed awareness network, collecting countless observations that collectively revealed patterns invisible to any single official. From your elevated vantage point, you notice several details that warrant reporting when you return to your home station. Unusual numbers of military personnel in what should be a primarily administrative compound. Storage buildings being emptied rather than filled during harvest season. And most notably, the presence of regional lords who theoretically should be overseeing their own territories rather than gathering here. None of these observations constitutes definitive evidence of troubling activities, but collectively, they suggest preparations inconsistent with the province's stated situation. Historians still argue about whether this observational intelligence role was formally institutionalized or emerged organically as a logical extension of messenger movements throughout. Spanish chronicles record that Inca rulers received regular briefings from senior messengers about conditions in distant provinces, suggesting the practice had at least tacit official recognition, while archaeological evidence of specialized meeting rooms in imperial administrative centers indicates designated spaces for this intelligence function. A particularly quirky aspect of messenger observation involves what intelligence analysts call baseline deviation, noting when routine patterns change in ways that might indicate significant developments. You've been running this same route for nearly 3 years, which provides you the contextual knowledge to recognize subtle abnormalities that would be invisible to occasional visitors. The governor's compound normally hosts regional officials on a predictable schedule aligned with agricultural and tax cycles. Today's gathering follows no such pattern. The Empire's strength flows from what it knows, your mentor explained during training. This philosophical approach acknowledged information as the fundamental currency of imperial power, not merely orders flowing outward from the capital, but ground truth observations flowing inward from the provinces. As a messenger regularly traversing the same territories, you developed granular knowledge of local conditions that even resident administrators might lack, given their more stationary perspective. You carefully memorize specific details about the gathering below, which regional lords appear to be leading discussions, approximate counts of military personnel by rank insignia, and notable absences among officials who would typically attend administrative meetings. These observations will become part of your standard report when you return to your home station, where intelligence specialists will compare your insights with reports from other messengers to identify meaningful patterns. Modern intelligence agencies would recognize this as human terrain mapping, the systematic collection of observations about social, political, and economic activities that collectively reveal underlying power structures and intentions. Without sophisticated surveillance technology, the Inca created a remarkably effective intelligence network by simply leveraging the observational opportunities inherent in their messaging system. One fascinating aspect of messenger intelligence gathering involved what anthropologists call multi-sensory observation, collecting information beyond visual data. You've been trained to note unusual sounds. Increased blacksmithing activity might indicate weapon production. Distinctive smells. Certain preparations produce recognizable odors associated with rebellion preparations. And even tactile information, soil conditions on roads, could reveal unreported military movements. This comprehensive approach treated the messenger's entire sensory experience as potentially valuable intelligence. Research has revealed that messengers received specialized observation training focusing on key indicators of provincial conditions: crop health, water management system maintenance, morale among labor tax workers, population movement patterns, and signs of elite compliance or resistance to imperial directives. These observation priorities reflected the empire's governance concerns: agricultural productivity, infrastructure maintenance, labor availability, and political loyalty. As you descend from your observation point to continue your journey, you mentally catalogue these observations within categories used for official reporting: routine, normal seasonal activities; noteworthy, unusual but not concerning activities; and priority, developments warranting immediate attention. This mental framework helped transform random observations into structured intelligence suitable for analysis and decision-making. Beyond explicit observation assignments, messengers developed an intuitive sense for regional conditions simply through regular exposure to diverse imperial territories. You've witnessed changing demographic patterns as populations shifted following administrative resettlement programs, observed variations in architectural styles that revealed cultural resistance to imperial standardization, and noted linguistic shifts in border regions where imperial Quechua competed with local languages. These contextual observations provided imperial administrators with nuanced understanding of how policies actually manifested in distant territories. "The messenger knows the empire better than the emperor" was a saying attributed to Senior Shasky. This reflected the unique perspective gained through physical movement across the realm, a horizontal, ground-level view that complemented the vertical, hierarchical information flowing through official channels. While officials in Cusco received filtered reports shaped by each level of the administrative hierarchy, messengers provided unfiltered observations from direct experience. The communication system's design unintentionally created ideal conditions for intelligence gathering. Messengers moved constantly between different social and ecological environments while remaining somewhat socially invisible, present but not fully participating in the communities they observed. This liminal status allowed you to notice patterns that might escape permanent residents habituated to local conditions or official visitors whose presence altered normal behaviors. By early evening, you've reached your destination and delivered your primary message: updated textile production quotas for regional storehouses. This official communication represented your formal purpose, but the intelligence gathered during your journey might ultimately prove more valuable to imperial governance. Tomorrow, you'll begin your return journey with new messages for delivery, gathering additional observations along the way. During your rest at the Tampu, you exchange observations with other messengers passing through, comparing notes about unusual activities, regional mood, and environmental conditions across different routes. This informal intelligence sharing created a distributed analytical network where patterns emerging across multiple territories could be identified through collaborative sense-making. Modern intelligence professionals would recognize this as fusion analysis, combining observations from multiple sources to identify significant developments invisible from any single perspective. The imperial communication system thus functioned as far more than message delivery. It created a sophisticated nervous system that provided continuous environmental awareness, political intelligence, and strategic early warning for an empire spanning extraordinary geographical and cultural diversity. As you prepare for sleep, you mentally rehearse both your official messages for tomorrow's journey and the unofficial observations you'll report upon return. Two distinct but complementary information streams flowing through the same human network. The flash of metal in the distance catches your attention first. Sunlight reflecting off helmets and breastplates unlike anything you've seen in the Empire's military forces. Your heart rate accelerates as you process the implications. The pale, bearded strangers from across the Great Water have penetrated much further inland than previously reported. You immediately alter your route, taking a hidden trail that adds distance but provides both concealment and a better vantage point to observe these foreign invaders without being detected. The arrival of Spanish conquistadors represents the greatest communication challenge in the Empire's history. Since their first appearance on imperial shores, information about these strangers has traveled along the very network you serve, creating a cascading series of adaptive responses throughout the administrative hierarchy. Your role in this unfolding crisis demonstrates both the remarkable strengths and ultimate limitations of the Inca communication system when confronted with an entirely unprecedented threat. We've become messengers of our own destruction, an elder runner told you recently. Every report we deliver about these strangers accelerates the Empire's transformation. This philosophical observation reflects the painful reality that the same communication efficiency that built the Empire now speeds the transmission of destabilizing information about Spanish weapons, diseases, and intentions. From your hidden observation point, you count approximately 20 mounted soldiers accompanied by native allies from recently conquered coastal regions. You note specific details, types of weapons, apparent leadership structure, travel direction, and speed that will form your urgent report when you reach the nearest major administrative center. These observations will join hundreds of similar reports flowing through the communication network, creating what military historians would recognize as a distributed intelligence picture of the invasion's progress. Historians still argue about how effectively the imperial communication system adapted to the Spanish incursion. Some scholars suggest the messenger network initially provided significant strategic advantage, allowing Inca forces to respond rapidly to Spanish movements across vast distances. Others emphasize how the system ultimately accelerated the Empire's collapse by spreading news of Spanish victories and imperial defeats, undermining confidence in traditional authority. Archaeological evidence supports both interpretations, with messaging infrastructure showing signs of both intensified use and deliberate destruction during the conquest period. A particularly quirky aspect of this historical moment involves what communication theorists call ontological shock, the challenge of transmitting information about something that exists entirely outside previous experience. How do you accurately describe horsemen to officials who have never seen horses? How do you convey the devastating impact of gunpowder weapons using vocabulary developed for traditional warfare? The Messenger Corps developed specialized descriptive protocols for Spanish technologies and tactics, creating standardized terminology that allowed consistent reporting across different observers. First describe function, then appearance, instructed emergency guidance distributed to messengers in contact zones. Compare new things to known things, but always note the differences. This pragmatic approach helped translate unprecedented observations into actionable intelligence, allowing imperial decision-makers to gradually comprehend the nature of the threat despite having no direct experience with similar invasions. You withdraw from your observation point once you've gathered sufficient details, then accelerate to maximum sustainable speed toward the provincial center 2 valleys away. This information warrants the emergency messaging protocol, the highest priority classification that authorizes using relay runners stationed specifically for crisis communication. Within hours, your observations will be racing toward Cusco through an intensified relay chain, with runners positioned at half the normal distance to maintain maximum transmission speed. Research has revealed fascinating adaptations in the messaging system during this period. Message verification protocols became more rigorous as rumors and misinformation spread alongside accurate. Special authentication methods were implemented for sensitive military communications to prevent interception or tampering. Alternate routes were established that avoided known Spanish positions, creating shadow networks when primary communication lines were compromised. One of the most significant adaptations involved message prioritization during the crisis. Traditional imperial communications followed established hierarchies. Religious matters, imperial succession information, military orders, tax administration, and agricultural coordination had clear precedence relationships. The Spanish arrival shattered these categories, creating new urgency classifications based on proximity to invasion routes, potential strategic impact, and time sensitivity for response planning. As you approach the provincial center, you observe unusual activity, preparations for rapid evacuation, valuable quipus being bundled for transport, and military units assembling in defensive formations. The communication network is clearly functioning effectively in warning of the approaching threat. Yet these preparations also reveal understanding that traditional defenses may prove inadequate against Spanish military technology. The messengers will outlast the messages, predicted a veteran runner watching these developments. This cryptic observation acknowledged that while the empire's political structures might collapse, the practical knowledge embedded in the messenger corps, route familiarity, endurance techniques, navigation skills, would remain valuable regardless of who controlled the territories. Some messengers, indeed, later served both sides during the conquest, their communication expertise transcending political allegiance. The messenger system's encounter with Spanish information technology represents one of history's most fascinating communication discontinuities. Your network achieved transmission speeds that amazed European observers, yet lacked the information density of written documentation. Spanish chronicles record conquistadors' astonishment at how quickly news of their movements spread through imperial territories, even as they recognized the strategic advantage their own written communications provided for complex tactical coordination. You deliver your urgent report to the provincial governor, who immediately activates the emergency response protocol. Within moments, multiple messengers depart in different directions, carrying standardized alerts to surrounding communities and military outposts. This radial information distribution represents another sophisticated adaptation. Recognizing that linear relay chains become vulnerable during invasion, the system evolved to spread critical intelligence through redundant pathways that couldn't be easily interdicted. A fascinating aspect of this period involves what information theorists call asymmetric advantage. The Empire's superior knowledge of geography, routes, and local conditions provided significant intelligence benefits, despite technological disadvantages. Spanish forces struggled with terrain unfamiliarity and altitude effects that imperial messengers navigated effortlessly, creating temporary windows of advantage when communication speed became decisive for military. The governor questions you directly about specific details. Exact weapons observed, whether the Spanish forces included local allies who might know regional shortcuts, and estimated travel speeds across the approaching terrain. Your specialized training in observational reporting becomes crucial here, allowing you to provide standardized descriptions that can be compared across multiple messenger accounts to identify patterns and inconsistency. As night falls, you join other messengers in reviewing maps made from knotted cords that track Spanish movements throughout the region. This visual representation of invasion patterns, created by correlating hundreds of messenger reports, demonstrates the sophisticated analytical capabilities that emerged from the communication system's distributed intelligence gathering. Without written cartography, the empire nevertheless created dynamic situational awareness through systematic correlation of observer reports. Tomorrow, you'll depart with updated defensive instructions for outlying communities, continuing your role in the empire's increasingly desperate information war against advancing conquistadors. The messaging system that once primarily carried tax records and administrative directives now focuses on evacuation timelines, resistance coordination, and preservation of essential cultural knowledge. The empire's nervous system has become its last line of defense against a threat that moves like nothing witnessed in Indian history. Decades have passed since you carried your last official message. Your once tireless legs now struggle with even modest hills, and younger generations know little of the vast communication network that once bound together the largest empire in the Americas. Yet here you sit, a living repository of messenger knowledge, sharing your experiences with Spanish chroniclers who seem simultaneously skeptical of and fascinated by your descriptions of the imperial information system. How far in a single day? The bearded chronicler asks through his interpreter, clearly doubting your answer. 200 miles for urgent messages through the relay system, you repeat patiently. One runner might cover 30 miles in difficult mountain terrain before passing the message to the next. You notice him making notes with quick scratches of his quill, a technology that still seems magical despite your years of exposure to European writing. The irony doesn't escape you. The Empire's sophisticated communication system is now being preserved through the very written records it operated without for centuries. Historians still argue about the precise capabilities of the Inca messenger system at its height. Spanish accounts record both admiration for its efficiency and skepticism about the speeds claimed by native. Modern experimental archaeology has largely validated messenger accounts, with researchers demonstrating that relay runners using traditional techniques can indeed achieve the transmission speeds described in early colonial records. As the Spanish reshape Andean societies in the aftermath of conquest, fragments of the imperial communication infrastructure persist in modified forms. Former chasquis now carry Spanish administrative communications along many of the same routes they once traveled for the Sapa Inca. Tampu buildings have been repurposed as way stations for colonial messengers or converted to Christian purposes. The knowledge embedded in the messenger corps, perhaps the empire's most valuable intellectual asset, gradually disperses as the institutional structures that supported it dissolve. Did you use any form of writing? The chronicler asks, still probing for parallels to European systems. You explain the quipu once again, emphasizing that these knotted records primarily carried numerical information, while verbal messages traveled through human memory. The concept clearly challenges his understanding of how complex governance could function, a cognitive limitation shared by many European observers who struggled to comprehend administration without alphabetic writing. A particularly quirky aspect of this historical transition involves what cultural historians call knowledge hybridization, the selective integration of messenger techniques into Spanish colonial communication. European messengers adopted coca use after witnessing its effectiveness for altitude sickness and endurance. Colonial administrators utilized former imperial relay stations while implementing their own written dispatch systems. Even the distinctive Andean running technique influenced European approaches to mountain travel, creating subtle technological transfers largely unacknowledged in official histories. Could messages be falsified or changed during transmission? The chronicler inquires, revealing European preoccupations with message authenticity that stemmed from their experience with written forgeries. You explain the multiple verification protocols embedded within the imperial system, distinctive verbal patterns that authenticated messages, the requirement for verbatim repetition before acceptance, and severe penalties for message alteration that created powerful deterrents against manipulation. Research has shown these accountability mechanisms created remarkable information fidelity despite reliance on human memory, an achievement that challenges modern assumptions about the necessity of written records for administrative accuracy. The conversation continues into evening as you share aspects of messenger training, route knowledge, and survival techniques that fascinate your European interviewer. This documentation process, occurring throughout former imperial territories as Spanish chroniclers interview knowledge holders from the collapsing indigenous systems, creates an invaluable but inevitably distorted record of the communication network's capabilities. The messages died with the messengers, an elder once prophesied during your training years. This observation has proven partially true. Much of the specialized knowledge embedded in the messenger corps now exists only in fragments, preserved in Spanish chronicles that filtered indigenous information through European conceptual frameworks. Yet certain elements have demonstrated remarkable persistence, transmitted through generations despite institutional collapse. One fascinating aspect of the communication system's legacy involves what anthropologists call embodied knowledge, physical techniques and practices that persist even when their original context disappears. The distinctive Andean running form developed by imperial messengers continues to influence highland movement patterns centuries later. Specific coca preparation methods for optimizing energy during extended exertion survived as practical knowledge among mountain travelers long after the official messenger corps disbanded. Could such a system function in Europe? The chronicler asks, his tone suggesting both doubt and curiosity about potential applications in his homeland. You consider this thoughtfully, recognizing the geographical and cultural differences that would make direct transplantation impossible. The European attachment to written documentation, their different relationship with vertical landscapes, and their reliance on horse-based transportation all created fundamental incompatibilities with the Andean system you served. Yet certain principles, relay organization, standardized rest infrastructure, and systematic observer reporting could certainly improve European communication if properly adapted. Research has revealed that certain European military and administrative reforms in subsequent centuries indeed incorporated elements observed in Andean communication systems. The French Revolution's semaphore telegraph network, Spanish colonial postal reforms, and later European Alpine messenger protocols all show influences, rarely acknowledged, from indigenous American systems that European observers initially dismissed as primitive. The messenger system's most enduring legacy extends beyond specific techniques to encompass broader principles of human-centered information transmission. The sophisticated understanding of human physiological limitations, optimization of biological performance through appropriate support infrastructure, and integration of communication with environmental knowledge all represent insights rediscovered by modern systems designers after centuries of technological focus. As darkness falls and the chronicler concludes his questioning, you reflect on the extraordinary communication system you served throughout your youth. Its physical infrastructure largely lies in ruins, Tampus repurposed or abandoned, relay stations unmanned, imperial highways deteriorating without systematic maintenance. Yet the knowledge developed across generations of messengers hasn't completely vanished, living on through individuals who carry fragments of this remarkable achievement. Tomorrow, you'll walk slowly along a section of the Royal Road near your village, a path you once sprinted along carrying information that shaped imperial decisions affecting millions. Local children sometimes follow, listening to your stories about the messengers who once formed the nervous system of a civilization that stretched from modern Colombia to Chile. Most dismiss these tales as exaggerations from a nostalgic elder, but a few listen with genuine curiosity about this remarkable communication achievement. Perhaps the Empire's most significant legacy isn't the stone architecture that still impresses visitors, but rather the sophisticated understanding of human-powered information transmission developed across generations of practical experience. Modern communication technologies using electronic transmission and digital storage have long since surpassed the speed and capacity of runner-based systems, yet the principles developed by Andean messengers, redundancy, verification, regional adaptation, and integration with environmental knowledge, remain relevant in contemporary network design. As you drift towards sleep, you find comfort in knowing that fragments of messenger knowledge persist despite conquest and cultural disruption. The Empire's physical manifestations may crumble, but its informational achievements, the sophisticated human solutions to communication challenges posed by Earth's most vertical empire, continue influencing information systems long after the last Imperial messenger delivered his final. The night grows quiet around your small dwelling, a modest adobe structure standing near what was once a minor tampu on the Imperial Highway. Outside, stars illuminate the mountain paths that once hummed with the constant movement of information carried by runners like yourself. The Empire has fallen, the messages have ceased, but the remarkable human achievement of the Imperial communication system lives on in fragments through both Spanish documentation and the surviving knowledge of those who once served as the vital connective tissue of a vast American. As modern civilization rediscovers the value of resilient, human-scaled communication systems in an era of increasing technological vulnerability, perhaps the sophisticated solutions developed by Andean messengers will find new relevance, not merely as historical curiosity, but as practical inspiration for information networks that must function across challenging environmental and social landscapes. The Chasqui may have disappeared from Andean highways, but their legacy continues evolving in ways they could never have imagined when carrying messages across mountain passes for an empire that seemed eternal. The night deepens around you, and the sounds of the modern world fade away. Your breathing slows as your thoughts drift from the ancient messengers to your own peaceful rest. The weight of history and the echoes of countless footsteps along royal roads become distant, replaced by the gentle rhythm of your own heartbeat. The mountain peaks that once challenged imperial runners now stand as silent sentinels under starlight, their imposing presence softened by dark. Those remarkable highways that connected diverse peoples across impossible terrain now lie quiet, their stones worn smooth by centuries of wind and rain rather than tireless feet. As you hover on the edge of sleep, imagine those messengers finding their own rest after days of relentless movement, their bodies finally still, their messages delivered, their duty fulfilled. Like them, you've completed your journey through this historical narrative and now deserve the deep, restorative peace that follows meaningful effort. The Empire's messengers knew that every journey, no matter how challenging, eventually leads to rest. So too does this story come to its natural conclusion, leaving you to drift gently into dreams perhaps filled with mountain paths, swaying bridges, and the steady rhythm of runners who connected an empire through sheer human determination. Sleep now, knowing that you've traveled alongside those remarkable messengers through the challenges and triumphs of their extraordinary profession. The final message has been delivered. The journey is complete. Rest well, and may your dreams be peaceful until morning light returns.